The torchlight cast long shadows across the council chamber, turning the familiar faces of Dahlia's packmates into something monstrous and strange. She stood in the center of the stone floor, her hands bound before her swollen belly with rough hemp rope that bit into her wrists every time she shifted her weight. 7 months pregnant, exhausted from a sleepless night in the holding cell, and utterly alone, she had never felt more like prey in her life. The evidence is clear. Jasper's voice rang through the chamber, smooth as honey and twice as poisonous. Her older brother stood at the elders' podium, wearing their father's ceremonial cloak, as though he'd already inherited everything. My sister has been consorting with rogues for months. The child she carries is proof of her betrayal. Dahlia's wolf pressed against her ribs, snarling at the lie, but she forced herself to remain still. Reacting would only make her look guilty. "That's not true," she said, keeping her voice level despite the fear clawing at her throat. The father was Marcus Thornwood, a traveling merchant from the Eastern Valley Pack. He died in a river crossing 3 months ago. I have letters. Forged, Jasper cut in smoothly, as were the documents you used to embezzle pack funds. A murmur rippled through the assembled wolves. Dahlia's stomach dropped. She searched the crowd for allies, for anyone who might speak in her defense, but the faces that looked back at her were closed and cold. Even Helena, who had been her nursemaid as a child, wouldn't meet her eyes. "Father." Dahlia turned to the high seat where Alpha Silvermane sat, his silver-streaked hair gleaming in the torchlight. "Father, please. You know me. You know I would never—" "The council has reviewed the evidence." Her father's voice was flat, empty. He stared at a point somewhere above her head, refusing to look at her face, at her belly, at the daughter he was about to condemn. "The charges are serious." Dahlia's heart cracked. She had always known Jasper was ambitious, had always sensed the jealousy simmering beneath his charming exterior. But she had never imagined he would go this far, and she had never, not once in her 23 years, believed her father would let him. "I didn't do any of this." Her voice broke despite her best efforts. "Jasper is lying. He wants the inheritance. He wants me gone, so he can claim father's territory when—" "Enough!" Elder Greymore slammed his staff against the stone floor. "The accused will be silent while the council deliberates." But there was nothing to deliberate. Dahlia could see it in their faces, could smell the decision already made in the bitter tang of their scents. Jasper had been preparing this for months, perhaps years, spreading whispers, planting evidence, turning her own pack against her one conversation at a time. She had been too focused on her pregnancy, too wrapped up in her grief over Marcus, to notice the trap closing around her. "I call for a vote," Jasper announced, and Dahlia watched her life crumble as hand after hand rose in favor of her exile. Not execution. Jasper was too clever for that. It would make him look cruel, might turn sentiment against him later. But exile in the dead of winter, 7 months pregnant with no supplies and no allies, it amounted to the same thing. He was simply making the wilderness do his killing for him. "The vote carries." Elder Greymore's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Dahlia Silvermane, you are hereby stripped of pack membership and all claims to Silvermane territory. You will leave our borders by moonrise and never return. So it is spoken. So it shall be." The rope around her wrists was cut. Dahlia rubbed the raw skin, staring at her father as the guards stepped back. He still wouldn't look at her. Whatever Jasper had told him, whatever lies he'd woven, they had been enough to make this man, who had held her as an infant, who had taught her to track deer through fresh snow, who had called her his little moonflower, abandon her completely. "Father," she whispered one last time. Alpha Silvermane closed his eyes. "Get her out of my sight." Dahlia didn't remember leaving the council chamber. One moment she was standing in the torchlight, The next, she was stumbling through the pack gates with nothing but the thin dress she'd been arrested in, her feet bare against the frozen ground. The guards shoved her forward, and she nearly fell, catching herself with hands that scraped against ice-crusted stone. "Run fast, little sister," Jasper's voice carried from somewhere behind her, too soft for the guards to hear. "Winter is hungry this year." She didn't turn around. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The forest swallowed her within minutes, dark pines closing around her like the walls of a cage. Dahlia walked until her feet went numb, then kept walking. Her wolf urged her to shift, to let the animal take over, but she couldn't. Not this pregnant, not without risking the baby. So she stayed human, stayed cold, stayed moving. 3 days. That was how long it took to reach the edge of the Alpha King's territory. Dahlia had stopped feeling her toes on the first night. By the second day, she had learned to eat snow slowly so it wouldn't cramp her empty stomach. By the third morning, the only thing keeping her upright was the knowledge that if she lay down, she would never get up again. The palace gates rose before her like a fever dream, massive iron wrought into the shape of snarling wolves. She had heard stories about the Alpha King her entire life. Victor Wildfire, they called him. The scarred sovereign, the wolf who had united the fractured packs through blood and fire and sheer unbreakable will. Some said he was a monster. Others whispered he was the only truly just alpha in 3 generations. Dahlia didn't care which version was true. She only knew that he was the one wolf in all the territories powerful enough to overrule a pack council's decision. The one wolf who might hear her case and find in her favor, if she could get him to see her at all. Halt! The guard at the gate was enormous, his shoulders blocking the weak winter sun. "State your business." Dahlia's legs shook. Her vision swam. The baby kicked against her ribs, a reminder that giving up wasn't an option. "I am Dahlia Silvermane," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she'd expected. "I have been wrongfully exiled from my pack. I demand an audience with the Alpha King." The guard's eyebrows rose. "You demand?" "I do." She straightened her spine, drawing on every scrap of dignity she had left. "I will not leave until Victor Wildfire sees me himself." For a long moment the guard simply stared at her, this bedraggled, pregnant, half-frozen woman making demands at the palace gates like she had any right to. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, but perhaps its distant cousin. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared through a side door. Dahlia waited. The cold seeped deeper into her bones with every passing minute. Her baby shifted restlessly, perhaps sensing her distress, and she pressed a hand to her belly in silent reassurance. "I'll keep you safe," she promised. "Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe." When the guard returned, he wasn't alone. The woman beside him was tall and elegant, her silver hair swept into an elaborate coil, her eyes sharp as winter ice. She studied Dahlia with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "I am Alara," the woman said, "Seneschal to the Alpha King. You claim wrongful exile?" "I do." "And you have proof?" "I have my word." Dahlia met the woman's eyes without flinching. "I have the truth, and I have nothing left to lose." Something flickered across Alara's face, there and gone so quickly Dahlia might have imagined it. The seneschal was silent for a long moment, her gaze dropping briefly to Dahlia's pregnant belly before returning to her face. "The king does not typically grant audiences to exiles," Alara said slowly, "but you are clearly in no condition to travel, and we are not in the habit of turning away pregnant women to freeze in the snow." She stepped aside, gesturing toward the palace doors. "You may enter. His Majesty will decide whether you are worth his time." Dahlia took her first step through the palace gates, and something that might have been hope kindled in her chest. She had made it. She was inside. Now she just had to survive long enough to plead her case. The palace corridors stretched before Dahlia like the throat of some great beast, all gleaming marble and vaulted ceilings that made her feel impossibly small. Her bare feet left wet prints on the polished floor, melted snow and something that might have been blood from where the ice had cracked her heels. She tried not to look at the stains she was leaving behind. Ilara walked ahead, her silver hair catching the light from crystal chandeliers that hung at intervals along the hall. The seneschal's pace was brisk, but not cruel, and Dahlia found herself grateful for that small mercy. Her legs trembled with every step, muscles screaming after 3 days of near-constant movement, and the baby had settled into an uncomfortable position low in her pelvis that made walking feel like wading through deep water. "The king is in his study," Ilara said without turning around. "He was not expecting petitioners today, so I suggest you make your case quickly and clearly. He has little patience for rambling." "I understand." "Do you?" Ilara paused at a set of massive oak doors, finally looking at Dahlia directly. "Victor Wildfire has ruled these territories for 12 years. He has heard every lie, every manipulation, every desperate plea that a wolf can conjure. He will know if you are deceiving him, and he will not be kind about it." Dahlia met the seneschal's gaze. "Then it's fortunate that I have nothing to hide." Something shifted in Ilara's expression. That same flicker Dahlia had seen at the gates, too quick to name. The older woman's hand rested on the door handle for a moment longer than necessary. "We shall see," she said, and pushed the doors open. The study was larger than Dahlia had expected, lined with bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling and dominated by a massive fireplace where flames crackled and danced. Maps covered one wall, marked with colored pins and handwritten notes. A desk sat near the windows, cluttered with documents and correspondence. But Dahlia barely registered any of it, because the man standing behind that desk commanded every scrap of her attention the moment she crossed the threshold. Victor Wildfire was not what she had imagined. The stories painted him as a monster, scarred, savage, more beast than man. And he was scarred, certainly. A pale line ran from his left temple down to his jaw. Another disappeared beneath the collar of his shirt. His dark hair was cropped short, his jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, and his shoulders were broad enough to block out the winter light streaming through the windows behind him. But it was his stillness that struck her most. He stood like a storm contained in human form, every line of his body radiating controlled power. His eyes were fixed on the document in his hand, and for a moment, Dahlia thought he hadn't noticed her at all. Then he looked up. Heat exploded through Dahlia's chest. It hit her like a physical blow, like someone had cracked her ribs open and poured liquid fire directly into her heart. Her wolf surged forward with a force that stole her breath, pressing against her skin, howling recognition at something Dahlia's conscious mind couldn't process. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe, gasping, her free hand flying to her chest as if she could somehow contain what was happening inside her. "No," she thought wildly. "No, this can't be." Across the room, Victor went rigid. The document slipped from his fingers, forgotten before it hit the desk. His pupils bled to molten gold, the wolf rising to the surface so fast that Dahlia could almost see it looking out through his eyes. His nostrils flared. Once, twice, and a low growl rumbled from his chest, the sound vibrating through the air between them like a physical thing. "Out," he said, and his voice was barely recognizable, roughened by something ancient and primal. "Ilara, out. Now." The seneschal didn't argue. The doors closed behind her with a soft click, and suddenly Dahlia was alone with the Alpha King, and the bond between them was screaming. Because that's what it was. She knew it with a certainty that defied logic, defied everything she thought she understood about her own life. The heat in her chest, the way her wolf was clawing to get closer, the pull that made her want to cross the room and press herself against him. Mate. Impossible, Victor breathed. He was staring at her belly, at the evidence of another man's child, rounded and undeniable beneath her thin dress. His jaw worked, gold eyes flickering between her face and her pregnancy, and Dahlia watched something she couldn't name war across his features. She should speak. She should explain why she was here, make her case for justice, do something other than stand frozen in the doorway like a startled deer. But her mind had emptied of everything except the feeling of him, his presence pressing against her senses like a hand against her skin, his scent wrapping around her even from across the room, pine and wood smoke and something darker, wilder. You're... Victor took a step toward her, then stopped himself, his hands curling into fists at his sides. You're carrying another wolf's child. Yes. The word came out hoarse. Dahlia swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. His name was Marcus. He died 3 months ago. Another flicker in those golden eyes. And you came here seeking justice. She forced herself to straighten, to meet his gaze even though every instinct screamed at her to submit, to bare her throat, to let him claim what the bond was already insisting was his. I was wrongfully exiled. My brother framed me. I came to petition the Alpha King. You came to petition me. Victor's voice had steadied, but his eyes hadn't shifted back. He was still looking at her like she was something impossible, something that had no business existing in his carefully ordered world. And instead you found... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mate. The word hung between them, unspoken, but undeniable. Dahlia's wolf whined, pressing against her ribs, demanding she go to him. Her human mind recoiled from the impossibility of it all. I didn't come here for this, she said, and hated how her voice trembled. I didn't want... I need justice, not a mate. I need someone to hear my case and rule in my favor so I can go home and raise my child in peace. That's all I want. Victor was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the gold began to recede from his eyes, the wolf settling back beneath the surface. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, measured, the voice of a king rather than a creature of instinct. You're exhausted, he said, half frozen and clearly malnourished. You've been traveling for days with no supplies and no protection. His gaze dropped to her bare, bloody feet, and something tightened in his jaw. This conversation can wait until you've been seen by a healer and had a proper meal. No. Dahlia shook her head, panic rising. No, I need to explain everything now, before my brother finds out where I am. He'll come for me. He'll try to... He won't touch you. The words were flat, absolute, carrying the weight of royal decree. You are in my palace, under my protection. Anyone who threatens you threatens the crown itself. Victor moved toward her, each step measured and careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. I will hear your case. I will investigate your claims, but not tonight. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, close enough that her wolf went liquid with longing. Tonight, he said quietly, you rest. We will address everything else tomorrow. Dahlia wanted to argue. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed that she couldn't afford to wait, couldn't risk giving Jasper time to learn of her location and plan his next move. But her body was shutting down around her, the last reserves of energy draining away now that the immediate crisis was over. She swayed on her feet, and Victor's hand shot out to steady her, then froze a hair's breadth from her elbow. May I? He asked. The question was so unexpected that it took her a moment to understand what he was asking. Permission. He was asking permission to touch her. Dahlia nodded, not trusting her voice. His hand closed around her elbow, warm and impossibly gentle. The contact sent sparks racing up her arm, heat pooling in her chest. Her wolf purred, actually purred, and she felt her cheeks flush with something that wasn't quite embarrassment. Victor led her to a chair by the fire, guiding her into the cushions with careful hands. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them, and something that might have been pain flickered across his features. "I'll have food sent to your chambers," he said, "and a healer to tend your feet. You'll want for nothing while you're here." "Thank you." He nodded but didn't move toward the door. Instead, he studied her face as if memorizing it, as if trying to make sense of this impossible thing that had stumbled into his palace and turned his world sideways. "Get some rest," he said finally. "You're safe now." Dahlia wanted to laugh at that. She hadn't been safe in months, hadn't felt safe since the day Marcus died and left her alone with a pregnancy, and no protection from her brother's schemes. Safety was a memory, a dream, something that belonged to a different version of herself. But sitting in the Alpha King's study, wrapped in the warmth of his fire and the impossible pull of a mate bond she hadn't asked for, Dahlia felt something loosen in her chest that had been clenched tight for longer than she could remember. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. She was asleep before Victor finished closing the door. The chambers they gave her were fit for royalty, a massive bed piled with furs and soft linens, a fireplace already crackling with warmth, a copper bathtub that steamed invitingly in the corner. Dahlia barely registered any of it before she collapsed onto the bed and slept, for what felt like years. When she finally woke, it was dark outside, and someone had laid out a tray of food on the bedside table. She ate ravenously, too hungry for manners, cramming bread and cheese and cold sliced meat into her mouth until her stomach ached. The baby shifted contentedly, apparently satisfied with the first real meal they'd had in days. Dahlia pressed a hand to her belly and felt tears prick at her eyes. "We made it," she thought. "We're alive. We're safe." Safe. There was that word again, the one that felt too fragile to trust. A knock at the door made her jump. "Enter," she called, hastily wiping crumbs from her chin. The door opened and Victor stepped through. He had changed from earlier, trading his formal attire for a simple shirt and trousers. In the firelight, the scars on his face stood out in sharp relief, a map of old battles and older pain. He carried a covered tray in one hand and what looked like a medical bag in the other. The healer was occupied with another patient, he said by way of explanation. "A difficult birth in the servant quarters. I didn't want you to wait." Dahlia stared at him. You brought me food yourself? And supplies to tend your feet." He set the tray on the table, then knelt beside the bed without ceremony. "May I?" There it was again. That careful question, that pause for permission. Dahlia found herself nodding before she could think better of it. Victor took her foot in his hands. She hissed at the contact, partly from pain, partly from the electric awareness that shot through her at his touch. Her heel was a mess of cracked skin and dried blood, and his fingers were impossibly gentle as he examined the damage. "You walked for 3 days on these," he said quietly, "through snow and ice. I didn't have a choice." "No." Something fierce moved through his eyes. "I don't suppose you did." He worked in silence, cleaning her wounds with warm water, applying a salve that smelled of herbs and numbed the pain on contact. His hands were large and scarred and capable, and they handled her as if she were something precious, something that might break if he wasn't careful. Dahlia watched him and felt her careful walls beginning to crack. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally. "The Alpha King, personally tending to a pregnant exile's feet. It doesn't make sense." Victor didn't look up from his work. "You came to my gates half dead, seeking justice. You're carrying a child and you're alone in the world. What kind of king would I be if I turned you away?" "A practical one, a smart one." She paused. "A safe one." His hand stilled. Slowly he looked up, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I will not touch you without permission," he said, each word measured and deliberate. "Not ever. Whatever this bond is, whatever it means, you have my word that I will never use it against you. You came here seeking justice. That is what I will give you. And the rest of it?" Dahlia's voice was barely a whisper. "The mate bond. The whatever this is between us." Victor was silent for a long moment. Then he finished wrapping her foot and stood, putting distance between them once more. "That," he said, "is entirely up to you." He left without another word, and Dahlia sat alone in her fine chambers, surrounded by luxury and warmth and the impossible reality of everything that had changed. Her wolf settled in her chest, content for the first time in months. The court learned of her presence by morning. Dahlia hadn't intended to leave her chambers. Victor had said they would speak today, and she thought it wise to wait for him. But hunger drove her toward the kitchens, and she got hopelessly lost in the winding corridors of the palace. She found herself in what appeared to be a reception hall, all vaulted ceilings and gleaming pillars. A handful of nobles were gathered there, taking their morning tea and exchanging gossip. They fell silent the moment she appeared. "Well?" A woman in elaborate green silk looked her up and down, taking in her simple borrowed dress, her slightly swollen feet, her very obviously pregnant belly. "The exiled wolf. I heard rumors, but I didn't quite believe them." Dahlia lifted her chin. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Lady Corwell." The woman didn't offer her hand. "And you are Dahlia Silvermane, the disgraced former heir who was caught consorting with rogues and carrying a bastard child." The words hit like a slap. Dahlia's wolf snarled, pressing forward, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I was falsely accused," she said steadily. "I am here to clear my name." "Oh, I'm sure you are." Lady Corwell's smile was a knife wrapped in silk. "Though one does wonder what sort of arrangement you've made with our king to secure his protection. A pregnant exile, showing up at the palace gates in the middle of winter? It's all rather convenient." Heat flooded Dahlia's face. "How dare you?" "I dare quite easily." Lady Corwell stepped closer, her voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. "Listen well, little wolf. Whatever you've offered Victor in exchange for shelter, it won't last. He'll tire of you soon enough, and then... Then what?" The voice cut through the hall like a blade, and every noble in the room went rigid. Victor stood in the doorway, his expression carved from stone. His eyes were fixed on Lady Corwell with a coldness that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "Please," he said, each word dripping ice. "Finish your thought. I'd very much like to hear what you believe will happen to a woman under my personal protection." Lady Corwell had gone pale. "Your Majesty, You were merely insulting my guest and questioning my judgment in front of a room full of witnesses." Victor moved into the hall, and the crowd parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. "Dahlia Silvermane came to me seeking justice. She is under the protection of the crown, and anyone who speaks against her speaks against me." Silence. "Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Lady Corwell's voice was barely a whisper. "Good." Victor stopped beside Dahlia, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through her sleeve. "Now apologize." Lady Corwell looked like she'd swallowed something extremely unpleasant. "I apologize for any offense given." "Accepted," Dahlia said, though the word tasted like ash in her mouth. Victor placed a hand at the small of her back, light, barely there, but unmistakably proprietary, and guided her toward the door. The assembled nobles watched them go in stunned silence. They walked through 3 corridors before Victor spoke again. "I apologize," he said quietly. "I should have warned you about the court. They're wolves in more ways than one. I can handle myself. I have no doubt." He glanced at her. something warm flickering in his eyes. But you shouldn't have to. Not here. Not under my roof. They stopped before a set of familiar doors. His study, she realized. Victor pushed them open and gestured for her to enter. We have much to discuss, he said. About your brother. About the charges against you. About what happens next. Dahlia nodded and stepped through the doorway. But as she passed him, she caught the edge of his scent, pine and wood smoke, and something that called to her on a level deeper than words, and she felt her wolf settle into her chest like it had finally found home. She was starting to realize that the Alpha King might be exactly what the stories said he was, a monster when he needed to be, and something else entirely when he chose. The question was which version of him she would get to know. Dahlia settled into the chair across from Victor's desk, her body grateful for the cushioned seat even as her mind raced. The study felt different now than it had that first night. Less intimidating, perhaps, though no less charged. Afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, catching motes of dust that danced in the air like tiny stars. Victor didn't sit behind his desk this time. Instead, he pulled a chair closer to hers, leaving a respectful distance between them, but close enough that she could see the fine lines of tension around his mouth. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning. Not the version you gave the court. The real one. The details you left out because you didn't trust me yet. Dahlia's hands found her belly, that familiar protective gesture that had become second nature over the past months. Why should I trust you now? Because I defended you in front of witnesses who will spread the story across every territory by nightfall. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've made myself your ally publicly. That can't be undone. She considered this. He was right. By defending her so openly, he'd tied his reputation to hers in the eyes of the nobility. If she proved to be the liar her brother claimed, Victor would share in her disgrace. Jasper has been planning this for years, she began, her voice steady despite the pain that clawed at her chest. He's 5 years older than me. When we were children, he was my hero. He taught me to climb trees, to swim in the river behind our estate. I adored him. Victor listened without interruption, his gold-flecked eyes intent on her face. Something changed when Father started talking about succession. Our pack doesn't follow strict primogeniture. The Alpha can name any blood heir. Dahlia's throat tightened. Father chose me. He said Jasper was too hungry for power, too willing to sacrifice others to get what he wanted. I thought Father was being unfair. I defended Jasper to him, argued that he deserved the position. A bitter laugh escaped her. I was such a fool. You were loyal to your brother. That's not foolishness, that's love. The gentleness in his voice made her eyes sting. She blinked rapidly, forcing the tears back. Jasper started small. Whispers to pack members about my judgment, my suitability to lead. He was always so subtle about it. Never anything I could point to directly. Then, about 2 years ago, he began forging documents. Small things at first. A ledger entry here, a letter there. Building a paper trail that would make it look like I was embezzling from the pack treasury. And no one noticed? He's charming. The word tasted like poison. Everyone loves Jasper. He makes them feel special, heard, important. Meanwhile, I was focused on learning to lead, on earning the pack's respect through competence rather than charisma. She shook her head. I never realized competence wasn't enough. Victor's jaw tightened. It should have been. Should have doesn't matter much when you're standing before a council that's already decided your guilt. Dahlia smoothed her dress over her belly, feeling the baby shift beneath her palms. When Marcus died, Jasper saw his opportunity. A pregnant, grieving woman is an easy target. He spread rumors that Marcus wasn't really from the Eastern Valley Pack, that he was a rogue, an enemy spy who'd seduced me to gain access to our territory. And the letters? The ones you mentioned? Marcus wrote to me constantly when he traveled. Sweet letters, full of plans for our future. Her voice caught. I have them still. I grabbed them when I fled. But Jasper claimed I forged them, that they were part of my cover story. Victor rose from his chair and moved to the window, his broad back to her. For a long moment, he was silent, and Dahlia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Did he believe her? Or was he calculating how to distance himself from this mess without losing face? When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. I'll send investigators to the Eastern Valley Pack. If Marcus Thornwood existed, if he was who you say he was, there will be records. People who knew him. Relief crashed through her so intensely she nearly sobbed. You believe me? He turned, and his expression made her breath catch. There was anger there, yes, but not directed at her. It was a cold, controlled fury that reminded her this man had ruled territories for 12 years, had survived assassination attempts and wars, and the kind of political treachery that would have broken lesser wolves. I believe, he said slowly, that your brother is the kind of man who would destroy his own sister to gain power. I've met men like him before. They're more common than you'd think among those who crave thrones. A knock at the door made them both turn. Ilara entered, her silver hair still perfectly coiled, her expression carefully neutral. Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption, but a delegation has arrived from the Silvermane Pack. Her winter ice eyes flicked to Dahlia, and something like sympathy flickered there. They claim to bear urgent news regarding a fugitive. Dahlia's blood turned to ice. Victor went very still. Who leads this delegation? Jasper Silvermane, Your Majesty. He presents himself as ambassador and heir apparent to the Silvermane territory. The room seemed to narrow around Dahlia. Her brother. Here, in this palace, probably already spinning his web of lies to anyone who would listen. He's here to finish what he started, she whispered. He won't rest until I'm dead. Victor crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping directly in front of her. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a wall between her and the door, between her and whatever threat waited beyond it. He will not touch you, Victor said, and his voice had dropped to something barely human, a growl that resonated in her chest. I don't care what documents he brings, what accusations he makes. You are under my protection, and that protection is absolute. You don't understand. Dahlia gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. Jasper doesn't just want the territory. He wants me destroyed. Publicly. Completely. He'll have brought evidence, witnesses who'll swear to things that never happened. He's been building this case for years. Then we'll dismantle it piece by piece. Victor's eyes held hers, and the gold in them burned like banked coals. Together. That word, together, struck her somewhere deep and tender. She'd been alone for so long, fighting battles she couldn't win, protecting herself and her unborn child with nothing but determination and the fading hope that someone, somewhere, would listen. And now the Alpha King himself stood before her, promising not just protection, but partnership. The baby kicked, hard, and Dahlia gasped at the sensation. Victor's gaze dropped to her belly, and for just a moment, his carefully controlled expression softened into something almost wondering. Is the child well? She's fine. She just has strong opinions about stress. Dahlia managed a weak smile. Takes after her mother, apparently. She? I don't know for certain, but I dream about her sometimes. A little girl with her father's eyes and my stubbornness. The admission felt dangerously intimate, sharing her hopes with this man she barely knew. Victor's expression did something complicated. Pain and longing and something fiercer all tangled together. She'll be safe, he said quietly. Whatever happens with your brother, whatever schemes he's brought to my doorstep, your daughter will be safe. I swear it. Dahlia wanted to ask why. Why he cared so deeply about a child who wasn't his, about a woman he'd known for barely a day. But she knew the answer, felt it thrumming in her chest every time their eyes met. The mate bond. She wasn't ready to acknowledge it aloud, wasn't ready to think about what it meant for her future, for her child's future. But she couldn't deny its existence anymore. "Thank you," she said instead. Inadequate words for an inadequate situation. Victor nodded and stepped back, his alpha composure settling over him like armor. "Alara, tell the Silvermane delegation they'll be received in the formal audience chamber tomorrow morning. Tonight, they can enjoy our hospitality and our observation. I want to know who Jasper speaks with, what messages he sends, every move he makes within these walls." "Yes, Your Majesty." Alara paused. "And the Lady Dahlia?" "Will dine with me privately this evening." Victor glanced at her. "If she's willing." Dahlia recognized the escape he was offering, a chance to refuse, to retreat to her chambers and hide from what was coming. But hiding had never saved her before. "I'm willing," she said. The dinner was served in a small antechamber off Victor's personal quarters, intimate and deliberately casual. No servants lingered. They brought the food and departed, leaving Dahlia and Victor alone with plates of roasted venison, winter vegetables, and fresh bread still warm from the ovens. "You should eat more," Victor observed, watching her pick at her food. "The healer mentioned you were malnourished." "I'm not particularly hungry." Dahlia forced herself to take another bite anyway. Her daughter needed nutrition, even if the thought of Jasper sleeping somewhere in this very palace made her stomach rebel. "Tell me about him." Victor's voice was soft, and it took her a moment to realize he wasn't asking about her brother. "Marcus, what was he like?" The question surprised her. Most people either avoided mentioning Marcus entirely or spoke of him with suspicion, wondering if the rumors were true. "He was kind," she said slowly. "Gentle, but not weak. He used to make me laugh. Really laugh, the kind that makes your stomach ache." She set down her fork, lost in memory. "We met at a territorial gathering 2 years ago. He was there representing his father's trading interests. I was there representing my pack." "Did you recognize the bond immediately?" Dahlia shook her head. "It wasn't like that with us. We weren't true mates. Just two wolves who chose each other." She hesitated, glancing at Victor. "I know that's considered lesser, in some circles." "It's not lesser." His voice was firm. "Choice is just as sacred as fate. Perhaps more so." The baby kicked again, gentler this time, and Dahlia pressed her palm against the spot. "I loved him," she said quietly. Not with the all-consuming fire that the stories describe, but with something steadier, something that felt like it could have lasted. "What happened?" "There was a storm. He was traveling back from a trading run, trying to reach me before the winter snows closed the passes." Her voice wavered. "The river was swollen. He tried to cross anyway." Victor was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry." "So am I." Dahlia took a breath, steadying herself. "I was 2 months along when he died. I didn't even get to tell him about the baby. Jasper waited precisely 1 month before making his move. Long enough for the initial shock to fade, soon enough that I was still vulnerable." Victor reached across the table, his large scarred hand stopping just short of hers. "An offer? Not a demand." After a moment's hesitation, Dahlia placed her fingers against his palm. The contact sent warmth flooding up her arm, and her wolf made a sound of contentment that vibrated through her entire being. Victor's breath caught, his pupils expanding as gold bled into his irises. "I feel it too," he murmured. "Every time we touch." "I know." She didn't pull away. "What are we going to do about it?" "Nothing you don't want." His thumb traced a careful circle against her wrist. "You came here for justice, not a mate. I won't use this bond to trap you." And if I wanted both? The words escaped before she could stop them, and heat flooded her cheeks. But Victor didn't laugh or press his advantage. Instead, his expression grew serious. Then we would take it slowly. Let you heal. Let you learn to trust me. Not because the bond demands it, but because I've earned it. Dahlia studied his face, the pale scar from temple to jaw, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years carrying impossible weight. This was a man who understood what it meant to be alone, to fight battles that never seemed to end. I don't need a mate, she said finally. I need a co-parent. Someone who'll help me raise this child in a world that's already tried to destroy her. Victor's hand tightened around hers. I'll be both, he said, if you'll let me. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Alara stood in the doorway, her perfect composure shattered, her face pale. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but you must come immediately. Her eyes found Dahlia, and the sympathy there had transformed into something sharper, warning. Jasper Silvermane has presented new evidence to the court faction leaders. He's accusing Lady Dahlia of murder. The formal audience chamber had been transformed into a tribunal. Dahlia stood at its center, her hands clasped before her belly as dozens of eyes bore into her from every direction. The morning light streaming through tall windows felt harsh and unforgiving, illuminating every face in the crowd. Nobles she didn't know, advisors who whispered behind their hands, and at the far end of the raised dais, Victor seated on the carved throne that had witnessed centuries of judgment. Jasper stood to her left, resplendent in ceremonial robes that made her want to scream. He'd always known how to present himself, how to craft an image of wounded nobility that made people want to believe him. Even now, with accusations of murder on his lips, he managed to look more sorrowful than vindictive. The evidence is irrefutable, Jasper was saying, his voice carrying through the chamber with practiced ease. My sister orchestrated the death of Helena Mosswood, our pack's beloved healer, when Helena discovered proof of Dahlia's embezzlement. The poison was traced to Dahlia's personal stores. 3 witnesses saw her enter Helena's dwelling the night of the death. Dahlia's blood ran cold. Helena, her childhood nursemaid, the woman who had braided her hair and sung her to sleep during thunderstorms. The woman who wouldn't meet her eyes at the council meeting. Helena is dead? The words escaped before she could stop them. As if you didn't know. Jasper's expression twisted with theatrical grief. She died 2 days after your exile, sister. Coincidentally, just before she could present evidence that would have condemned you beyond any doubt. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder. Dahlia felt the weight of suspicion pressing down on her, suffocating as deep water. She searched the crowd for friendly faces and found none. Even Alara's expression had gone carefully neutral, impossible to read. Only Victor remained steady, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her wolf press forward against her skin. The mate bond thrummed between them, a lifeline in a sea of hostility. This is a lie, Dahlia said, forcing her voice to remain level. I loved Helena. She practically raised me. Love makes the perfect cover for murder. Jasper produced a sheaf of documents, holding them aloft. These are sworn testimonies from witnesses who saw you argue with Helena the day before your arrest. They heard you threaten her. I never... And this. He pulled out a small vial, its contents dried to a dark residue. Wolfsbane extract, found hidden in your chambers after your exile. The same poison that killed Helena Mosswood. The chamber erupted. Nobles shouted over each other, some demanding immediate execution, others calling for proper trial. Through it all, Jasper watched her with barely concealed triumph in his eyes. Dahlia's mind raced. The evidence was fabricated, had to be, but it was devastatingly thorough. Jasper had spent years building this trap, layering lie upon lie until the truth was buried so deep no one would ever find it. She could deny everything, but denial meant nothing against documents and witnesses and physical proof. Then movement caught her eye. A man she didn't recognize, positioned along the wall behind the throne. His hand moved inside his coat, and something about the angle of his body, the way his attention fixed on Victor rather than the spectacle below. Ice flooded her veins. Assassin. The realization crystallized in the same instant that something else stirred within her. A sensation she'd spent her entire life suppressing, pushing down, pretending didn't exist. Her mother had possessed the same gift, had warned her never to use it openly. "They'll fear you," her mother had whispered. "They'll call you witch, monster, abomination. Hide it, little moonflower, hide it deep." But her mother was dead. Marcus was dead. And if she didn't act now, Victor would be dead too. And then nothing would matter, because Jasper would win, and her daughter would be born into a world ruled by her brother's cruelty. Dahlia made her choice. She stopped fighting the power that had always lived beneath her skin. Let it rise. Let it flood through her with a force that made her gasp, that made her eyes burn with silver light. The chamber fell silent, every wolf in the room going rigid as they felt the shift in her, the emergence of something ancient and rare. "Seer, you want truth?" Her voice rang through the sudden silence, carrying harmonics that weren't entirely human. "Then let me show you truth." She turned to face her brother and watched the color drain from his face as he recognized what she'd become. "Jasper Silvermane," she said, and the words carried weight, compulsion, the undeniable force of truth sight made manifest. "You began forging documents 2 years ago, when Father first named me his heir. You spread whispers about my character, turned packmates against me one by one. When Marcus died, you saw your opportunity and accelerated your plans." Silver light pulsed from her skin, casting strange shadows across the chamber walls. Jasper stumbled backward, his composure cracking. "You killed Helena Mosswood yourself," Dahlia continued, each word striking like a hammer. "You poisoned her because she discovered your forgeries. You planted evidence in my chambers before my arrest. You bribed 3 wolves to give false testimony." "Lies!" Jasper's voice cracked. "She's a witch. She's corrupting your minds. You conspired with a faction of nobles to assassinate the Alpha King during this very hearing." Dahlia's gaze swept the chamber, and she saw it now. The guilty parties flinching, unable to meet her silver-lit eyes. "You planned to blame me for his death, eliminating 2 obstacles with 1 strike." Victor rose from his throne, golden light blazing in his own eyes as his wolf surged to the surface. He turned just as the assassin lunged, blade flashing in the morning light. Dahlia didn't think. She threw herself forward, one hand outstretched, and the power inside her erupted in a wave of silver light that struck the assassin mid-leap. The man flew backward, crashing into the wall with enough force to crack stone. He slumped to the ground, unconscious. The chamber exploded into chaos. Guards moved to secure the would-be assassin, nobles scattered in panic, and Jasper tried to run. He didn't make it 3 steps. Victor was there, moving faster than any wolf had a right to. His claws extended and pressing against Jasper's throat before Dahlia could blink. The Alpha King's growl filled the chamber, deep and terrible, silencing every other sound. "You threatened my mate." Victor's voice had dropped to something barely human. "You tried to murder my child." Jasper whimpered, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "She's not even yours. The child, it's not." "She will be." Victor's grip tightened, and blood began to well around his claws. "I will claim her as my own, raise her as my own, love her as my own, and you will never touch either of them again." "Please," Jasper gasped. "Please, I'm your sister's brother." "You are nothing to me." Dahlia stepped forward, her power still thrumming beneath her skin, her eyes still burning with silver light. The crowd parted before her, wolves pressing back against the walls as if afraid to get too close. You were nothing to me the moment you betrayed our family. Father? Does father know? About Helena? About all of it? Jasper's silence was answer enough. Dahlia's heart shattered and reformed in the same breath. Her father had been deceived, manipulated, just as thoroughly as the rest of the pack. That didn't erase the pain of his abandonment, but it transformed it into something she could eventually forgive. Father's territory goes to the pack, she said, her voice steady. Not to you. You get nothing. No land, no title, no legacy. Everything you schemed for, everything you destroyed, it ends here. Victor looked to her, golden eyes meeting silver. The mate bond sang between them, fierce and certain. Death or exile. Dahlia studied her brother, this man who had been her playmate in childhood, who had held her hand at their mother's funeral, who had grown into someone so twisted by jealousy that he'd murdered an innocent woman and tried to destroy his own sister. She could demand his death. Part of her wanted to watch the life drain from his eyes and know he could never hurt anyone again. But that part of her had Jasper's voice, Jasper's hunger, Jasper's willingness to destroy anything that stood in the way, and she refused to become him. Let him live, she said. Strip him of pack, of territory, of the Silvermane name. Let him wander the wilds as a rogue, knowing that everything he wanted belongs to someone else. Let him live with having lost everything. Victor nodded slowly, something like pride warming his expression. So it shall be. He released Jasper, who crumpled to the ground, gasping. Jasper, formerly of the Silvermane Pack, you are hereby exiled from all territories under my authority. If you are found within my borders after sunset, your life is forfeit. So I speak. So it shall be. Guards dragged Jasper away, his protests echoing through the chamber until the doors closed behind him. In the aftermath, Dahlia stood trembling in the center of the audience chamber. The silver light had faded from her eyes, leaving her feeling hollow and exhausted. Her baby kicked. Once, twice. A reminder that despite everything, she had won. Victor's hand found hers, warm and steady. You're shaking. I just revealed a power I've spent my entire life hiding. A laugh escaped her, slightly hysterical. I think shaking is allowed. You saved my life. His thumb traced circles against her wrist, that familiar gesture of comfort. You could have let the assassin strike. It would have been easier for you. No Alpha King asking difficult questions about mate bonds and futures. And then Jasper would have won. Dahlia shook her head. I didn't survive 3 days in the wilderness, pregnant and alone, to let my brother destroy the one person who actually believed me. Dahlia. Victor turned her to face him, cupping her face in his large, scarred hands. The gesture was impossibly gentle, reverent. My brave, brilliant, impossible mate. Will you let me keep you? The word mate should have frightened her. Instead, it settled into her chest like coming home. I told you, she whispered. I don't need a mate. I need a co-parent. And I told you. He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in. I'll be both. That night, with the chaos of the hearing finally settled and her brother's conspirators rounded up for judgment, Dahlia stood in Victor's private chambers and let herself feel something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the room. Victor waited by the window, watching her with eyes that held none of the predatory intensity she'd come to associate with alpha wolves. Instead, she saw patience, understanding, and beneath it all, a longing so profound it made her chest ache. We don't have to do this tonight. His voice was soft. We have time. All the time you need. I've been waiting my whole life. Dahlia moved toward him, her wolf rising with each step, pressing forward with a certainty that left no room for doubt. I waited for Marcus, who was kind and gentle and chose me when fate didn't. I waited for my pack to see Jasper for what he was. I waited for justice, for safety, for someone to believe me. She stopped before him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. I'm done waiting. Victor's breath caught. His hands lifted toward her, then paused, hovering just above her shoulders, asking permission even now. Dahlia closed the distance herself, pressing her palms against his chest. The mate bond surged at the contact, flooding her with warmth that chased away the last lingering cold of her exile. Her wolf howled in recognition, in joy, in fierce possessive hunger. Are you certain? Victor's voice had gone rough, barely controlled. Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be bound to me, to this life. I've never been more certain of anything. She tilted her head, baring her throat in the ancient gesture of trust. Claim me, Victor. Make me yours. He moved. One moment she was standing before him. The next she was pressed against his chest with his arms locked around her, his face buried in the curve of her neck. He inhaled deeply, a rumbling growl of satisfaction vibrating through her entire body. Mine. He breathed against her skin. From the moment you walked into my study, I knew. My wolf knew. We've been waiting for you our whole lives. Then stop waiting. His teeth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, pressing but not breaking skin, giving her one last chance to pull away, to change her mind. But Dahlia didn't want to pull away. She arched into him, her fingers threading through his dark hair, pulling him closer. Please, she whispered. Victor bit down. Pain lanced through her, sharp, immediate, overwhelming. But even as she gasped, the pain began to transform. Heat flooded her veins, spreading outward from the mark in waves that left her trembling. The bond between them, which had been a gentle thread since that first meeting, suddenly blazed into existence like a river of fire connecting her soul to his. She felt everything. His fierce protectiveness, his wonder at finding her, his absolute determination to keep her safe. She felt the loneliness of 12 years ruling alone, the weight of impossible decisions, the hope he'd almost stopped believing in. All of it poured into her through the bond, overwhelming and perfect. His teeth released her, and his tongue traced the mark, soothing the sting. Dahlia, he groaned. My mate, my queen. But she wasn't finished. Dahlia pulled back just far enough to meet his eyes and watched his expression shift to shock as she gripped his shirt and yanked the collar aside, baring the junction of his own neck and shoulder. My turn, she said, and sank her teeth into his flesh. Victor's roar shook the walls. His arms locked around her with bruising intensity, holding her against him as if afraid she might disappear. Through the bond, she felt his shock transform into fierce, overwhelming joy, the realization that she wasn't just accepting him, she was claiming him in return. Equal partners. Equal mates. His blood tasted like pine and smoke, and something wilder underneath. Something that called to her wolf and made her want to howl. The bond between them doubled, tripled in intensity, until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. When she finally released him, they were both trembling. Yours, Victor whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. Completely, irrevocably yours. Mine, she agreed, and the word felt sacred on her tongue. And I'm yours. Both of us. She pressed his hand to her belly, where their daughter kicked enthusiastically. All of us. Victor's laugh was wet, his eyes suspiciously bright. Both of you. All three of us. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. My family. They held each other as the fire burned low, as the moon rose over the palace, as the mate bond settled into something warm and steady and eternal. Dahlia felt the last of her fear drain away, replaced by a peace she'd almost forgotten was possible. She was home. Spring came to the Alpha King's territory with birdsong and blooming flowers, and the cry of a newborn baby. Dahlia held her daughter against her chest, exhausted and exhilarated and so full of love she thought she might burst from it. The baby's eyes, already dark like Marcus's had been, blinked up at her with unfocused wonder, tiny fingers curling around Dahlia's thumb. "She's perfect," Victor said from beside her, his voice rough with emotion. He'd stayed through the entire birth, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement, crying openly when their daughter finally entered the world. Their daughter. Not by blood, but by choice. And as Victor had said months ago, choice was just as sacred as fate. "We still need to name her." Dahlia traced her daughter's soft cheek. "I was thinking, Helena, after the woman who raised me." Victor's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. "Helena Wildfire. It's beautiful." "Helena Thornwood Wildfire," Dahlia corrected. "She should carry her father's name too. Both of them." The coronation came a week later, when Dahlia was strong enough to stand before the court in the ceremonial gown Elara had commissioned. Deep purple silk embroidered with silver wolves, cut to accommodate her still recovering body. Victor stood beside her in matching colors, their daughter cradled in his arms, looking every inch the proud father. "I present to you Luna Queen Dahlia," Victor announced, his voice carrying through the crowded audience chamber. "Seer of the ancient bloodline, protector of the crown, and my mate in all things." The assembled wolves dropped to their knees in unison. Dahlia looked out at the sea of bowed heads. Nobles who had whispered about her, who had believed Jasper's lies, who had watched her exile vote without protest. She could have demanded their punishment, could have used her power to root out every unkind thought, every moment of disloyalty. Instead, she chose mercy. "Rise," she said. "Today marks a new beginning. The past is forgiven, but not forgotten. Let it remind us all how easily truth can be twisted, how quickly justice can be corrupted." She found Elara's face in the crowd, saw the seneschal's approving nod. "We will build something better together. Stronger. More just." That night, after the celebrations had ended and the guests had departed, Dahlia stood on the balcony of the royal chambers with Victor's arms wrapped around her from behind. Helena slept peacefully in her cradle, watched over by the most attentive guards in the palace. "I received word from the Silvermane territory today," Victor murmured against her hair. "Your father has requested an audience." Dahlia's heart clenched. "And?" "I told him he could come, but only if you agree to see him." She was silent for a long moment, watching the stars wheel overhead. Her father had failed her when she needed him most. He'd believed Jasper's lies, had refused to meet her eyes as she was exiled. The wound of that betrayal still ached, might always ache. But he was also the man who had taught her to track deer through snow, who had called her his little moonflower, who had chosen her as heir over her brother because he'd seen something worthy in her. Jasper's manipulation had run deep. How much of her father's behavior had been genuine, and how much had been carefully orchestrated. "I'll see him," she said finally, "but not yet. Let him wait. Let him earn it." Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. "Whatever you need." The mate bond hummed between them, warm and steady as the spring breeze. Through it, Dahlia felt Victor's love, his pride, his absolute devotion. And she felt her own emotions reflected back, the wonder of finding home in the last place she'd expected, the fierce protective love for her daughter, the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. She turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him properly. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips, "for believing me, for choosing us." "I didn't choose you." Victor's smile was soft in the starlight. "Fate chose you for me. I just had the sense to recognize the gift. Pretty words from the scarred sovereign. I'm trying to live up to my queen's example. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and the bond sang with shared joy. My brave, brilliant, impossible mate. How did I ever survive without you? Badly, from what I hear. Dahlia laughed as he growled playfully, sweeping her into his arms. Ilara says you were insufferable. Ilara talks too much. He carried her back inside, toward the bed that was now theirs, toward the life they were building together. Helena stirred in her cradle, let out a small cry, and Victor set Dahlia down gently before moving to lift their daughter into his arms. She's hungry, he said, and the tender way he cradled the baby made Dahlia's heart swell. She's always hungry. She gets it from you. I have no idea what you're talking about. Dahlia watched him carry Helena to her. This alpha king, who had promised to be both mate and co-parent and had kept that promise in every possible way. He'd held their daughter first, had been the one to place her in Dahlia's arms after the birth. He woke for night feedings without complaint, sang off-key lullabies that made Helena's face scrunch with something that might have been early disapproval, and treated both of them with a devotion that bordered on worship. I love you, Dahlia said, and felt the truth of it reverberate through the mate bond. Victor's eyes glowed gold as he settled beside her, one arm around her shoulders, the other supporting Helena as she nursed. And I love you. Both of you. Always. Outside, spring turned slowly toward summer, the palace filled with new life, new hope, new beginnings. And in the royal chambers surrounded by love she'd almost lost faith in finding, Dahlia finally let herself believe in happy endings.